Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The first, I wanna say to thanks for opportunity given to me to present my study about misconceptions on interferences concept and remediate using conceptual chain text based analogy model. My name is Andi Astika Wahyuni from Universitas Negeri Makassar. The first is about introduction. Physics is still a material that is considered difficult and unpleasant to learn. The factor behind the student difficult is this understanding physical material is the lack of understanding of the concept due to the poor quality of teaching and learning. Research question is based on the introduction that has been described. The problem in this study was how to develop a lecture model using an analogy model based conceptual chain text to remediate the misconception of pre-service teacher about like interference in physics. And the purpose of the study is to describe the conceptual change of pre-service teacher after being taught using an analogy model based on conceptual change text about interference of like in physics. Next, about literature review. The first is about definition of misconception. Misconception by some expert is defined in the different terms. Some as the term misunderstanding, misinterpretation of fact, and naive belief. In general, misconception is defined as a difference in a concept or idea that is built by students, our way of thinking with the ideas of teachers and scientists are working in understanding scientific concept. Cause of misconception, there are misconception source from students, misconception source from teachers, misconception source from textbooks, misconception source from context, and the last misconception is source from the teaching method. The next about analogy model and conceptual chain text. Analogy model is described by transferring an idea or comparisons for known concept to unknown concept. The known concept is called the analogy and the unknown concept is called the target. In the teaching with analogy model is a learning models that provides guidelines for using analogies in learning. In this model, ideas from a concept that is familiar or analog to student are transferred to ideas that are not familiar or target. If the analog and the target share some similarities, an analogy can be drawn between the ideas. The next about conceptual chain text. A conceptual chain text can be defined as texts that are made in such a way that they are written in the form of teaching materials that can cause a reader dissatisfaction with their preconception and can instill a new conception that are easy to understand, can be accepted, and are felt to be useful for solving new problems. Systematic of writing conceptual chain text. There are a situation. The second is the question, and the third is answer and reason. And the next about dominant misconception, and the last is the correct explanation of the concept using an analogy model. This is explanation compares the analog of futures with the target of future on the concept or principle being taught. The next about process method. This study uses a qualitative approach with subjects were pre-service teacher who were students of basic physics 2 at one of universities in Makassar City. Research procedure initial information obtained, there are problems related to students' conception and misconception about light interference in physics by using open-ended question on the worksheet of exploration phase. And the next, analyze of test result based on the result of the worksheet of exploration phase found in the file. The will be analyzed to determine what concept are misconception. Then, by using the conceptual chain text, are carried out as a step to remediate misconception. And the last tip, and the last step is to provide a worksheet of concept application with open-ended question to describe the conception of pre-service teacher about concept from a misconception to a scientific concept. The next about the result and discussion. The first is a dominant form of misconception. Many pre-service teachers think that phenomenon of lag interference is phenomenon that show the characteristic of relative and refraction lag. So they explain the concept of interference symptoms with the concept of lag as a geometry optic. What is a phenomenon of interference? Is a symptom that show the characteristic of light in the context of physical optic, namely to prove that a light is a wave. In this application to everyday, there are misconceptions, such as the symptom caused by the colors or that appear on soap bubbles are the same as the symptoms of the appearance of a rainbow after the rain caused by the light refraction, namely the reflection of monochromatic light into polychromatic, so that the colorful symptoms are considered a characteristic of the phenomenon of polarization, namely the colors are formed from overlapping light waves. The next analogy model based conceptual change can see in slide display where is analogy model obtain a three part. They are focus, action, and reflection. The last is conclusion based on the result and discussion that have been described. It is conclude that pre-service teachers still have misconception about the concept of lag interference, and after being given treatment using conceptual change text based on analogy model, it's found that pre-service teacher who experience misconception can turn into scientific conception. The text of conceptual change based on analogy models can be recommended to be used to remediate misconception, especially on the concept of lag interference in physics. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.